Dear friends, during our last meeting, we reviewed what was happening during the sixth trumpet, and we understood that it was about a war of great magnitude in the Middle East. This is not surprising. The Middle East is a powder keg. But I would dare draw a parallel with another prophetic text, a text from the book of Daniel, which also speaks of a war in the Middle East. We'll try to see by chance if these two texts are not talking about the same thing. So, I invite you to read the text we find in the book of Daniel, chapter 11, at the end of the chapter, verses 40 to 45. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships, and he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. And he shall plant the tent of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. Here is a text that, taken out of its context, is difficult to interpret, but we will try to outline the main ideas. The text speaks of a confrontation between the king of the north and the king of the south. In fact, the beginning of chapter 11 tells us about the clashes between the king of the north and the king of the south during the Hellenistic period, that is, the period of those who succeeded Alexander the Great. You know that Alexander the Great established a huge kingdom stretching from Greece to India. On his death, his territory was divided among his 4 generals, the Diadochi. Basically, 4 kingdoms came out of this vast kingdom of Alexander the Great. But the 2 largest correspond to those called further in the text, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom was initially led by Seleucus and became Seleucid Empire. The kings were generally called Seleucus or Antiochus and sometimes Demetrius. As for the southern kingdom, it was led by the Ptolemies and was none other than Egypt. The last king or queen of this lineage was Cleopatra. Throughout this period, and before the Roman Empire did make a clean sweep of it and embraces it all, the 2 kingdoms of north and south fought against each other. We are here in course of history. But have you noticed the first expression of the text? At the time of the end, which suggests that in the end time, in the last days, there will be again a confrontation in the Middle East. Confrontation between countries that were previously represented on the one hand by the Seleucid Empire stretching from Turkey to India, from Asia Minor to India, and on the other hand, Egypt in the south. What does this text basically say? It tells us that the northern kingdom will be helped by the Libyans and the Ethiopians. It tells us that this northern kingdom will invade the glorious land. The most beautiful country for Daniel, of course, is the land of Israel, the Palestine. It will also invade Egypt. I have forgotten to mention someone else, someone neutral. Edom, Moab, and the children of Ammon. They currently represent the territory occupied by Jordan. We must recognize that Jordan is trying to maintain a good balance between the various existing forces in the Middle East. In short, the geopolitical situation described in that text is very close to the current situation. Wars in the Middle East, but how does it end? The text of Daniel is more accurate. It tells us that the northern kingdom will be forced to withdraw after invading Israel, after invading Egypt and carrying out the gold of Egypt. He shall withdraw and come to his end, and no one will help him. That is to say that this immense armada will be forced to retreat, to come to its own end. By which means? By internal quarrels, by natural phenomena, through starvation. We can imagine everything the text doesn't tell. But this is how the confrontation would end. Now, what allows us to link that text, that war in the Middle East, to the text we have seen about the sixth trumpet? They have much more in common than we can imagine. The first point in common is that both occur in the Middle East, and that the northern kingdom, the territory occupied by Nebuchadnezzar, is not very far from the one occupied by Seleucus, the general of Alexander the Great. Therefore, it relates to all the kingdoms located to northern Israel, from Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan to the borders of India. So one of the protagonists is quite well identified. The second element that seems important to me concerns the time. I want to draw your attention to this point because in the text of Daniel, we have quite a few chronological elements I would like to highlight. Verse 40 uses the expression "at the end of time." So we know that it will happen in the last days. But it's more specific than that, because if we read the first verse of chapter 12, we find this, Daniel 12 verse 1. At that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation even to that time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, every one who is found written in the book. Chapter 11 verse 40, at the time of the end. Chapter 12 verse 1, at that time. Which means that immediately after this war we have been described between the northern and the southern kingdoms, we are told that Michael stands up. And Michael, you know him. It is the name of war of Jesus, the name signifying who is like God. And at that time, he stands up, which means that his war with the enemy comes to an end, for the service ends up. So, war will last until the end, and the fact that Michael stands up shows that the service in the sanctuary is completed. Then comes a time of trouble that can very well be compared to the time of the bowls in the book of Revelation. I would like to point out that we have the same thing in Revelation with the 7 trumpets. Please read with me in chapter 11 from verse 15. Revelation 11, verse 15. Then the 7 angels sounded, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, "The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever." The kingdoms of this world have become our Lord's and of his Christ. Which kingdom is this? Or rather, who is this kingdom? Are not the elect the kingdom? So Christ is given his kingdom. How could he be given his kingdom if we do not know yet to whom it belongs? And if we know who is part of it, this means that the judgment of God's house is ended. Judgment is over. Confirmation is given at the end of the chapter. Let's look at what is said in verse 19. Then the temple of God was opened in heaven, and the ark of his covenant was seen in his temple. And there were lightnings, voices, thunderings, and earthquake, and great hail. If the temple is open, it evokes what happened at Jesus' death. You probably know that at Jesus' death, the veil between the holy place and the most holy place was torn from top to bottom. A human hand couldn't have done this. God himself tore the veil. In doing so, he showed that the service in the earthly sanctuary was over. Now, the opening in the sanctuary allowing us to see the Ark of the Covenant, allowing us to go into the most holy place, clearly indicates that the service is over. Whether we read in Daniel with Michael who stands up, or in Revelation where we see the Ark of the Covenant, the meaning is the same. The service is completed. As a result, what happens in the book of Daniel as well as in the book of Revelation is that this war in the Middle East is presented to us as the last chronological milestone before the end of the service. Here, God gives us a valuable indication. Before the service ends, there will be a war in the Middle East. I do not know the details, and there are still things to be cleared, but it is indeed a landmark and an interesting milestone. At least, we have a very specific starting point because, as you know, all the armies were ready for the hour, day, month, and year, which means that this war has an extremely precise starting point, to the day, to the hour. Now let's move forward a little more. First link between the two, a war in the Middle East. Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 to 45, Revelation chapter 9, verses 13 to 20. Second link, both are a milestone just before the end of the service of Jesus in the heavenly sanctuary. Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, Revelation chapter 11, verses 15 to 19. Third point, this war causes many deaths. Daniel 11:44, Revelation 9:15. It is extremely destructive. Both texts relate it. Many people are involved in it. So we have here an additional element telling us that this war is extremely bloody, devastating. All these elements probably allow us to think that it's the same war going on. I would like to move a little further in that direction and point out that there could be other elements following, releasing interesting information to better understanding the link between the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. For within the very prophecy of the sixth trumpet, we have an additional, meaningful information. And we find this additional information in chapter 10 and at the beginning of chapter 11. I'm referring here to the little book open and the two witnesses. All these take place during the time of the sixth trumpet. Regarding the book of Daniel, we also have an addendum to this book. While the prophecy seems to be over, that we have come to, terrible events described in the bowls, I would like to demonstrate that the book of Daniel itself brings us up to the time of Christ's return, for it talks about resurrection. Let's read Daniel chapter 12, verse 2.
Daniel, chapitre 12, verset 2.
And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. The resurrection is clearly indicated here. I don't want to go into a detailed analysis of the text, but it is about resurrection. And we are also told that during this time, those who are wise. Oh, do not think that you need to have a university degree from Harvard or some polytechnic school to preach here. The wisdom mentioned here is the one from the heart. Those who have discernment, those ones will teach many. We must understand that, close to the end, men of God, men with an undivided love, will be among those who proclaim a final message. I told you that the sixth trumpet was the last message. Well, it is the last call, within which there is an ultimate appeal. That's what we'll see during our next meeting. For the time being, let us remember that the text provides an additional meaningful information to the prophecy that I'm going to read to you. The previous verses have spoken of resurrection. Now, God, in verse 4, reveals to Daniel this additional information. Daniel chapter 12, verse 4. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge will increase. Here is the additional information revealed. In the following verse, we are told this. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood two others, one on this river bank, and the other on that river bank. I continue, Daniel chapter 12, verse 6. And one said to the men clothed in linen, we find again the men clothed in linen, one already seen in Daniel 10, verse 5, the one who already appeared, who was above the waters of the river. How long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be? Then I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and half a time, and when the power of the holy people has been completed, shattered, all these things shall be finished. Although I heard, I didn't understand. Then I said, My Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be purified, made white, and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. Thus, God declares here that there is a hidden prophecy, a secret one that will be revealed at the last moment. And this prophecy, that additional information found in the book of Daniel, we found it also in the book of Revelation, in the form of a little book open and the two witnesses. So you see, there is quite a lot of similarities between these two texts. That is why I allow myself to bring them together. I think we do need to pay attention to the prophecy, even if we do not understand all the elements. You see, when Prophet Simeon and Anna, the prophetess, announced to Mary what would happen to Jesus, do you think she understood everything she was told? Certainly not. But she kept these things in her heart. So we may not understand everything revealed in the prophecy. However, let's keep them in our heart. Apostle Peter tells us in 2 Peter 1:19 that the prophecy is like a lamp shining in a dark place to enlighten us. Do we want to move forward in that direction? For sure. If you are now gathered together, it is because we are interested in prophecy. We do not understand everything, but we keep it in our heart, and in due time, things will become clear.